Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is the last meeting for the municipal year, so let's enjoy. Item agenda number 1, minutes of the previous meeting. Everyone happy with that? Or any issues outstanding? All agree? Any apologies?
Councillor Mestrat, Beves, I haven't heard from James.
Okay, mine sometimes come late. I've not heard anything. Any interest? Admission, this is going to go live, or it is going live, so be mindset of what we say in public. Can I just go through the panel members, starting with you? There are some officers and cabinet members, so just as it's going live, so everybody's aware who we are.
Right, Councillor Cathy Scott, sorry, my apologies. It's Councillor Cathy Scott, and I'm here to talk on the Democracy Commission.
Carl Whistlecraft, Head of Democracy, to speak on the same item, Chair.
Councillor Hilary Richards, Member of the Panel.
Councillor Carol Patterson, Member of the Panel.
Councillor John Taylor, Member of the Panel.
Linda Summers, Co-optee, Member of the Panel.
Philip Challoner, Public Co-optee on the panel.
Councillor Turner, Corporate Cabinet Member.
Rachel Spencer-Henschel, I'm the Director for Corporate Strategy and Public Health, and a number of the items are in my portfolio.
Julie Stewart-Turner, Chair of Scrutiny, and is here to observe.
Gulf Massive, Chair of Scrutiny Panel. Agenda item 4, can I pass it on to you?
Sorry? Didn't catch that.
I said agenda item 4.
Okay. Members will have got this report and read this report. If anybody's got any specific questions, that might be the best way forward, because it's quite a short report. Is item 4.
Just to remind everyone, the Councillor Musrat Han has sent apologies. She's not well, so just going to give Graham. Any questions, panel members?
We haven't got a report. We've got a summary of the report.
Graham, do you want just brief?
It doesn't tell us anything.
The main report is actually under item 6, really, the financial monitoring. This is just a very brief overview of this report. As I said, the main report's the one further on in the agenda, item 6, which has the details in there.
I accept that item 6 picks up the financial aspects, but it doesn't cover some of the other areas that are mentioned in the summary. So it doesn't cover things like procurement, mobile and agile IT, air quality, waste policy development, etc. So we've got no report on any of those areas at all.
My understanding was that the cabinet members were just going to go brief through, and if there's anything, we can bring it into the forward plan for the next municipal year.
Right, okay. That wasn't my understanding, but we'll go through that. So, council finances, delivery of in-year savings. We should, obviously, the financial year only ended on April 5th. We're still doing the close down, but we shall probably come in with a slight underspend. That's anticipated. We have had some extra pressure this year because we've had a bad winter, but we should make the majority of the £54 million savings we anticipated. Cathy's going to talk about the Democracy Commission. The Access to Service strategy is developing well. Tied in with that is now we've tied the library service review into the access to services, and we're working across the local authority now with other members and other service directors in other areas, and we'll bring a paper forward next year. Probably an interim paper in somewhere like June or July, with the final paper probably much later in the year, because we're now widening this out to take the access to service strategy into that. Procurement, that's the moving forward on that. The mobile and agile IT, again, it's doing really well at the moment. I don't know, it's actually got a copy in here of the take-up of the citizens' account. It's been really positive and much better. We've reached all our targets, and I'm anticipating we should see a rise in take-up as we marketed that as we sent the council tax bills out. So hopefully there will be a further uptake in that. But as I said, we are above target. We're above target for overall numbers and also for the sign up to the different parts of that strategy. So that's going really, really well. And now information available for, if you want it, it can be provided of a breakdown of which wards and which areas are providing the most sign up on that. Air quality, Mus actually leads on this, but at this moment in time there was a discussion at full council, and we wrote to government, because this is not an issue that we can tackle on its own. This has to be either at least regional but national, because obviously pollution is not all ours, it moves around a little bit. So whilst we're doing all we can, we still need some support. We need a proper strategy from either the region or the government, because as I said, it's a bigger issue than simply Kirklees. But it is something we take very seriously. We have to tackle this. It does affect the health of lots and lots of people, not only in Kirklees, but across the whole piece of the West Yorkshire. Transformation of frontline services, that continues to ongo, and that's about changing the way frontline services work. And it ties in some ways with the access to services. And waste, again, it's not my lead, that's actually Councillor Mather who deals with that, but I know work is ongoing around that to try and not only reduce the waste, but also look further forward, because at some point we will have to negotiate a new waste contract with the current provider. So that work is ongoing, but that is a few years away. But as I said, Councillor Mather is the lead on that, but unfortunately she's on holiday at the moment. Fortunately for her, she's on holiday at the moment. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
Sorry,
Hilary first.
Sorry about that. It wasn't looking my way. Could you say a little more, please, on procurement moving forward?
I'm going to ask Rachel to answer that, because I haven't got any papers on procurement at the moment.
Before Rachel or anybody else does answer that, I was just going to also ask, in my turn, about commissioning on outcomes, because obviously the two are very linked. And I'd certainly be very interested to hear about commissioning on outcomes, which I don't think, unless I missed it, I don't think Graham mentioned.
No, again, I'll ask Rachel to answer on that, those two specific items. You've got the up-to-date reports on those.
In terms of procurement then, I mean, I'm hopeful that in the transformation item that we have in the informal session, there'll be some of that will be covered through that, because it is part of our transformation programmes. But work's ongoing at the moment to create a category-led model for how we do procurement across the council. So I think historically we've had probably more of a service lead on procurement, where procurement is done by services for services, and what we're trying to move towards is getting an oversight of the very sort of defined categories of procurement. So that essentially means that if we're looking at adults procurement activity, we can look at that in the perspective of if we've got a contract over here and a contract over there that has some similarities of outcomes that we're trying to achieve, we would potentially look at how we could do that more effectively. What that also does is give us a bit more governance over that procurement activity that's taking place, so that as a council we're confident that the procurement is done effectively and that we've got an up-to-date and rigorous approach to contract management. We're also ongoing with a number of savings that have been identified through the transformation programme by more effective procurement, and some of those include things like as I said, those interdependencies between contracts and doing economies of scale and making sure we've actually got better bang for our buck. But also things like looking at performance enhancements to contracts and just making sure that we've actually got a better oversight of what we're doing and we're able to realise some of those savings if those contracts aren't being delivered.
I seem to be hearing words I've heard for the last 10, 15, 20 years.
No, and I understand, because I think that possibly we've kind of done some of this and we've got some really good activity in some of our areas, but it's just getting a bit more of a corporate oversight of that and quality assurance to make sure it's more effective, because I think that some areas are really good with their procurement and really good with their contract management, but it's just making sure that that's consistent.
John?
I guess for me, and this isn't a criticism of Graham, because I think Graham's done the best he could do given the hand he's been given to play, but I just want to register my dissatisfaction with this report. The role of this committee is to scrutinise. It's very, very difficult to scrutinise if you're given no information to scrutinise. And it's one I'd ask you as chairman, and perhaps Julie, given that you're here, to just reflect on and think, should we have done something before this report came to this meeting today to make sure there was adequate information provided to members of the scrutiny panel so we can actually scrutinise what we're asked to scrutinise? Because I don't feel we're able to do our job today. And it's not a criticism of Graham at all. I think you've done your best in terms of the information you've got before you. But if we're going to scrutinise areas, you've got to give us some detail to look at. There is no detail here at all. And I think that's a criticism of the process. And I think we should bring this back to the next meeting where we've actually got some information we can look at and we can form a view on. Because we're guessing at the moment.
Sorry, before Julie comes in, I agree. I think this is something we've discussed in the past, and it's not a criticism towards any of the officers or the cabinet members. It's simply the process. The first year for this, trying to set some of the meeting dates and everything else, and with the process that we've found the last couple of months, we've had to take some of the items, losing Debbie and all the other stuff, which has been in, literally, I mean, it's been all over the place. So therefore, I'm happy to bring this forward for the next first planning meeting that we've got to discuss this and put it on the agenda. Julie?
Sorry, Garth won't know because he wasn't able to be at the last meeting, but we did a presentation to CMG. I did a presentation to CMG just a couple of weeks ago, and Shabir came to the last management committee meeting, so we reiterated the messages we reiterated those messages there. But I've banned verbal reports coming to scrutiny, just full stop, and PowerPoint presentations are by exception only, because I agree, if you're going to do your job properly, you need the information up front and you need time to digest that and understand it. So that will be changing next year.
Can I just come back? I hear what you say, but I've chaired loads of meetings. When I see an agenda, when I get a draft agenda, if I'm not happy there's enough information for an agenda item, I push back. So there is an implied criticism of you then. I don't mean it in a nasty way, but you need to step up to the plate. And if you're given that and said, here's the paper, you've seen this in advance, you need to go, no, that's not good enough. We need you to do that on our behalf because we don't get to see it in advance.
I take that on board, but I think of the process, the way the office is, number of meetings have been cancelled. The last meeting of the corporate panel was cancelled due to the weather. The previous one, we had officers working around on the budget process, so that got pulled. So we've had literally 2 months kind of up and down. It is the process, but I take the points you've made.
I'm not going to be nasty either. But I do have to say that it does actually say, and of course that is why we're here, one of Scrutiny's key function is to hold the Cabinet to account. So we are, I mean, Muz isn't here to be able to hold her to account, so we can excuse that, so to speak, but really would like to hear from the Cabinet member. And it's nothing to do with officers and whether or not they were stuck in the snow last month or whatever. We have got Graham here, and therefore we should be holding him to account. And that's what we're here to do, with or without a report. We can do it without a report if we really want to. And I would like to come back on commissioning on outcomes, because I think this is really, really crucial going forward. And Rachel just then didn't actually touch on it. Maybe we haven't made any progress on this. But it is very much linked to that corporate procurement. And once you've got with a corporate procurement system there, it does make commissioning by outcomes easier to do, and obviously then easier to meet targets or whatever that might have been set. There's also some downsides on commissioning on outcomes, but I certainly know lots of voluntary organisations, lots of outside organisations other than the council are having to provide their services and being paid by results. I want to know what we're doing in terms of commissioning that, or how we're holding our own services to account.
Can I suggest we get this on the agenda item for the next first meeting that we've got for next municipal year, and leave that on this now, and then go to the next one for Cathy, and we can come back on this. Is that okay with everyone? That's right, yeah?
One particular comment, and that was a reference was made to achieving economies of scale, and I would just say, be aware that sometimes when you commission or have a contract, you might do it with a large umbrella organisation that does actually have diseconomies of scale.
Can I just say one thing on procurement? And Hillary's right, a lot of this has been talked about for donkey's years, but we all know, and look, if you look around nationally, procurement is really, really difficult, and not everybody gets it right all the time. I mean, we've just seen some horrendous things in the press about trying to procure new passports, for instance, and that's a really rigorous process. And which do you do? The government went for the cheapest, yet there was an outcry that they weren't a British company. So procurement is really difficult. You've got to balance, are you getting best value for money, but are you also keeping the Kirklees pound in Kirklees? So developing a longer-term strategy is really complicated to say, because do we want to keep the Kirklees pound in Kirklees? Absolutely we do, and that's the right thing to do, but can we get it a bit cheaper somewhere else? We may do, so you have to balance that off. So working on a longer-term strategy, that's why it's taking a little while to get that strategy right, and such a large organisation where you've got different areas buying services and procuring different items is really difficult to pull together, and it will take a bit more time, I think, but I think we are making progress, but it is not easy how you get that balance right. Should we be concentrating on Kirklees, or are we better buying something a bit cheaper? So there's a real balancing act. I think once we've got that sorted in his mindset of which is best for us, then I think we'll be able to move forward. But it is not easy, and it does take a long time. But you're right, Hillary, it's been talked about for donkey's years, hasn't it? And everybody, yeah. But as I said, it is not easy. But I do think we're actually getting to the point where we're actually making progress, and we will come up with a better strategy around procurement. As I said, there are lots of factors to take into account.
Can we finish on this one? And, my apologies for the lack of information, but I think in terms of this first year, or trying to set the meetings and the dates and times, and plus trying to get the briefings in, we've had a number of briefings cancelled with Jackie and the rest of the directors simply because of the process of how things have slotted in. So hopefully, I think Penny, before she passed on the information to yourself, we have set the date certainly for the next year to get things in order. So some of the dates have been in the offices, so we can move more of a speedy process next year. Cathy, can I pass the next agenda item to yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. We're here today, this morning, to give you an update on the Kirklees Democracy Commission. As members will be aware that are here today, that it did go to full council, and after our approval of the report on the 15th of November, it was agreed that we'd establish a working group. I'm delighted to tell you this morning that the first meeting took place. It's a cross-party working group, which I know has got the heart of Kirklees in it. We've agreed some terms of reference, and there are some points in that perhaps Scrutiny might want to look at and see if it's robust enough. You should have it on your paper. It's on your information that you required. It's on part number 2 of your paper. I think it's important that the draft terms of reference, that they are looked at, and that embedded into that is everything starts with the citizen. It's about working in the open, having a partnership approach, and that's cross-party, but it's also about looking at businesses and the citizen out there, so everything they want to input into it. And what's key here is that every councillor is involved in this. There's no door closed, so the door's open and it's welcome, and everything's going to be evidence-led. You will have a number of appendices with you today. It actually shows you where we're actually looking at. It's a quite comprehensive report. Hopefully you did get it on time, because one of the findings of the Democracy Commission was that it was bite-sized right information at the right time so that people could understand it. It's not just about the words, it's about holding meetings in public so that people can participate. So that was one of the problems. And it was having that flow of information that, you know, is it the right information that you're looking at? And are you spending the right amount of time on it? So that's one of our key areas. So we've got 4 priorities. You should have it on Appendix 4. And I'm going to bring the officer, Carl Whistlecraft, in. That will just give you a highlight on that area.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Just to sort of reinforce what Councillor Scott said, the point where we've got to in terms of progressing the work is mainly the first meeting of that working group was to actually, I suppose you could say, to set its stall out and partly to determine how it is going to work. But more importantly, I guess, from an organisational perspective, is to get a sense of priority of what they wanted to focus on at the outset. And Appendix 4 seeks to set out what that working group has said from the 48 recommendations are areas that they would want to focus on. And I think stepping back from the report itself, they have principally identified recommendations that I would say are of a more strategic and longer term nature, which I think, personally and professionally, I think is very encouraging. I think in terms of next steps, we've now been charged as officers to go away, not to design the work, because it has to be led and steered by the working group, but to begin to take those recommendations and set out some possible proposals for that working group to consider, so that we have a steer in terms of the detailed work. So the programme management approach is important because it instills a rigour and hopefully satisfies the working group and Scrutiny that there's some discipline to this work, that it's not just going to drift. And I think that's why there will be project mandates that are produced for the working group, not a done deal, but actually to allow a discussion to take place so that there's some cross-party member ownership and a steer to allow work, hopefully to progress at greater pace than I think we'd all agree it has done thus far. I've nothing else to add. Happy to take questions.
John.
So I'm a member of this working group, and we did have our first meeting, which was an amusing meeting because David's van had broken down and he joined us from the van, wasn't he? It was a bit, literally, we were trying to conference call him in from a van. I think some good progress was made, and there was a good debate in the meeting, and I think we made some positive steps. My one observation, and this isn't something I didn't say in the meeting, but I'll just share with you today, is when you read the detail, there's quite a lot of focus on younger people. And I've said that what we need to make sure is we are balanced and we're looking at all citizens. And what I'd like to see is some outreach work going to perhaps people who have carers or people who are disabled, older people, mums with young children. So you've got that broader spectrum of citizens, because at the moment it is very much focused on one small group. And we need to recognise that we're here to look at all citizens rather than just one small aspect of that. And that was my only criticism of it, to be fair. Otherwise, very supportive.
Can I make a couple of points, one of which just builds on that? It is obvious from the detail that it is very much focused on young children. My concern there, though, as well, within that category, is that it's very much focused on delivery through schools. And in Kirklees, as you'll be better aware than I am, 84% of those over the age of 16 are actually in the 3 colleges. So it's you will only get kids up to the age of 15 if you focus your approach through schools, by and large. The contact through the three colleges, Kirklees College, Huddersfield New College and Greenhead, is going to be key for targeting 16 to 18. But my general point then was around the governance of this. I can't quite get my head round how the cross-party working group sits alongside the core programme team and who it is that's responsible for the governance and ensuring that what has to be delivered is delivered.
Yeah, I'll in terms of the young people point, Councillor Tay is absolutely right. It's absolutely been logged. I think in terms of, I suppose, an explanation as to where we'd got to, you will recall when I came to see you on the 20th of October, I said, from a head of service point of view, there's very little work I am undertaking because there was due process to go through council till a set of recommendations was signed off. But I did say that in the interim we would seek to use opportunities like Local Democracy Week, which is very much focused on young citizens as a European initiative, to try and progress some of the recommendations and test out some ideas. So that took some of the stuff in a direction where it was focused on young people, not as a conscious and intentional decision, but as a consequence of trying to wrap some activities around an event to test some ideas. But Councillor Taylor's absolutely right, and we're not limiting the wider dialogue now to colleges, but there's also obviously Huddersfield University and some of the opportunities that we've got to work collaboratively around some of this work. In terms of the programme structure, I'll re-emphasise that all of this work must be councillor-led in terms of that particular diagram. The purpose of the programme team is, if you haven't got all the recommendations in view because I didn't bring all 48, but there are actually there are a number of recommendations that are about organisational culture within the council and how officers work effectively with councillors. So that core programme team is made up of senior officers from different parts of the council, because in seeking to move that culture change forward, it requires leadership. And not just leadership from the head of democracy, because he would say that, wouldn't he? You know, so I think there's a whole piece around, actually, there's an internal bit that helps us progress some of the recommendations. But in terms of the actual leadership and governance from a member's perspective, and I apologise if this diagram don't do that justice, the cross-party working group is front and centre of that. Have I answered your question?
It does, and that's helpful, thank you. My sort of practical question, I suppose, is who is it that will decide when the work has been achieved, when it's complete? How do you know when you've got there?
I think there's a number of bits. So there's 48 recommendations. Some of them are task finish and very straightforward. Some of the stuff that have been identified on that longer list, you could say are quite longer term outcome based and generational. So I think in terms of putting some rigour into this around outcomes, so there's a whole set of work taking place while between the last meeting and this one, to actually think about how do we put some measures in place, impact assess and deliver against outcomes, and that's some of the officer stuff that's taking place. I think some of the stuff is very easy to measure in terms of start finish. So we will have, taking one recommendation, we will review our governance structures. A review will take place, recommendations will be made and will be implemented. But some of the outcomes associated with that activity we may not see for 12, 18 months. And I think it's about working with the working group to actually get a clarity around member expectations around some of that. Sorry.
It seems to me that on my reading of this, coming to it cold to some extent, that was what was missing, is what the expected outcomes were and how you would know when you'd got there. And maybe that's something that we could come back to at some point at a later stage, really, for clarity around that. Thank you.
I actually, because I didn't want to overwhelm you, I brought the outcomes and everything last time. I thought, do I put them in this time or not? I mean, we've got them and I can circulate them round again.
Before I bring Philip in, what we're discussing on schools and young people, is there actually a breakdown? Are we going to embed this into schools? And it would be interested to find out exactly when the process begins, what is actually, how are the young, kind of go through what the process is going to be, rather than the overview, actually, speak to some of the young kids to see what they feel, bring it forward and possibly change it around, because at the end of the day, we're delivering something to young people to what we feel is necessary. But at the end of the day, the delivery and the recipients might find it different. So kind of come back to see, just change it, tweak it a bit.
I think if you think about some of the principles that are in that working party terms of reference, all we've put before you now is some stuff that's been tried, right? That there is not a detailed cross Kirklees programme, because quite rightly we've not had that discussion with the working group, so and with young citizens. So in terms of that particular area of work, that has to come back to the working group because they've identified it as one of the priorities. That needs to be worked through and scoped through about how you would develop that. But in and amongst that, I guess that doesn't stop you, and you could take any piece of work in this regard, doesn't stop you testing and piloting stuff to see if it works. Sorry.
Philip,
I'll make a more general comment, I suppose, and that is engagement with the wider electorate. It's very difficult because the only time people engage is during the periods like we have now coming up to local elections. But in anecdotal evidence, I was talking to somebody only yesterday and they said, why bother? And this is a mature adult. And the point is, it's changing the culture so that people can see that there is some effect of going to the polls. It doesn't matter what side they choose in terms of where they place their vote, but it does feel there's a lot of disengagement from the adult community.
Kathy?
I'd like to come back on that. There is quite a lot of disengagement. We found that from when we were testing it and going out in the market, speaking to people, that they did feel disaffected. And I think it was part of the problem was everything was buried in big reports, or it was hidden, or websites weren't easy enough to go through to get to the information you wanted. So people become very disillusioned, and they didn't know enough about people out there in order to have that faith in a process. So we are looking at that, we are addressing it, but it is also where the councillor fits in. We're looking at the IT systems that we're actually using. Is it the right equipment for the right time? And changing the process. So there is parts of that. But one of the things that John did say, I'll come back because I was indicating, but John, when you were saying about the first working party meeting, I thought how innovative. David Sheard's driving in a van and he's talking to us, because we would never have thought of doing things like that. Just simple things like that, changing the methods of how we do things. And I think one of the things that was highlighted that's come through a lot of it, people don't understand there's meetings in public that councillors hold, or it's a public meeting, and there's different formats, and it's that interaction where people don't understand from the beginning whether they can have input into it or not. So it's about going through processes and looking and making people be part of the journey rather than excluded, sat on the fringe.
A couple of things. Firstly, just on David, I think it's because he wasn't driving that the problem was. The van actually wasn't working rather than he was driving. But no, more importantly, just coming back on your point about the schools and children, I'm going to push back again. And it's in the diagram, actually. We've got young citizens and citizens. They're all citizens. I don't want us to be doing things specifically just for a small cohort. And actually, wouldn't it be far better if we could have a dialogue with a range of citizens? So whether it's in a school or in a college, but there are older people there that can share their experiences. And we don't do this. So I don't like this idea of trying to break everybody down into little groups, and they are different to everybody else, because they're not. You will get a range of issues, a range of views from people who are in their 20s and people who are in their 90s. And there'll be people in their 90s and in their 20s that have similar views or similar concerns. And we should look at people as individuals and not as trying to bracket them into, these are young people and therefore they're different and have to be treated differently than older people. I don't get that, and I don't support that. And the other point I was going to say about the disengagement, I found for many years of involvement in local politics that you're right, a lot of people aren't that interested. But they're always interested when it's something that actually impacts on them. And that's the challenge, is how do you transform politics into something that is meaningful? I represent a more rural area that's a collection of villages. You will find in those villages that you know when there's something not going well in that village because everybody will engage. But the rest of the time, they'll say, sorry, John, I'm not interested. And it's finding the right mechanisms for capturing that interest and helping them understand that actually is part of politics. And the fact that 80% of the time they're disengaged isn't necessarily wrong because they've got other things to get on with in their lives. They're not all saddos like us. So I think it's just about how do we present that. And you're absolutely right, is how do we make sure that we're making it easier for people to engage when they feel they want to. Thank you.
I think, one of the other areas what John's mentioning is, it's a huge area because when it comes to actually dealing with young people, young citizens, it's same throughout the board. But the reality is it's an ongoing thing because there are going to be things that we are going to make mistakes where we kind of develop and move on. But in terms of engaging, the young are very good with IT. You know, when it comes to petitions, subjects that they feel strongly about. So it is an ongoing issue that in another 2 years, we're going to kind of like sit back here and think and say, how can we develop it even further? So
just be careful with stereotypes. We all know about the Flockton bypass now, and there's a petition going for the Flockton bypass. That was started by a lady in her 70s. So don't just say it's young people are good with IT and with petitions. Actually, it's individuals who are, and they can be of any age.
And I'm just going to echo what John says, that it's everybody, we care about everybody in Kirklees, and they do matter, and democracy does matter to them, and we are reaching out to them. And I know you talk about the rural villages, but equally out on the estates, when anything happens, people come together. It could be from a kitchen to a social housing, anything like that. So there is innovative ways that we're looking at to make that reach. We've created a Kirklees Citizens account. We're looking at ways to be innovative and work with businesses, because it's not only about the citizen, it's about the business around it that wraps around it, the economic value. So we'll be looking at that to create accounts for them to be part of it. So all I can say is we're taking on board what you say. I'm looking forward to working with you, John, because I know there'll be some really key things. But also what's key here is it's not only about the working party. Some of these decisions will be coming back to council because they're not in things that we can implement on our own. It'll have to have councillors, buy into it, and also citizens. So I'm looking forward to that.
any further comments before I close this agenda item off? I think my recommendation would be to have this in the forward plan in the coming year, just to kind of get, not just simply to get an update, but just to have a feedback and see how things are developing and take it from there.
I think we need to have a conversation about this because the rest of the Management Committee want it on the programme as well. It's something that needs to be embedded across all parts of the Council. So we need to look at who's looking at what elements of it, really, and we need a wider conversation. So we don't want to duplicate in what the cross-party working group's doing. We've already got a team of councillors that are effectively being the scrutiny leading on this. Then we've got management who wants to be embedded in it. So we need to have a conversation about who's looking at what part of it. So that's just a bit of a wall.
Yeah, that could, we can have discussions on that, whoever takes role on and take it on, rather duplicating it. Kathy, Carl, thank you very much. The next item is financial monitoring. I know it's kind of overlapped on some of what Graham was talking, but we can just briefly touch on the financial monitoring. Eamon?
Hi. Yeah, this was an item that was deferred from the previous scrutiny panel due to the adverse weather. And some things have moved on since the since March, so I just want to pick up on that as well as part of this update. It's quite a high-level paper because it covers quite a lot, so I didn't want to overburden in terms of information, but I think in the spirit of what we want to present here, I think it's also about exploring any opportunities in terms of things that you might want to come back to, or areas going forward in terms of next year, in terms of scrutiny panel interest for early discussions as we start to go through 18-19 as well, and budget preparation and budget implementation. So it's kind of in that spirit. But broadly speaking, in terms of where we're at in terms of our overall financial position, we did report at Q3 Cabinet that we were looking at a relatively small underspend of about 1% against an annual revenue budget of 307 million, which in the context of us setting out at the start of the budget, in terms of our approved plans, a 54 million planned saving requirement suggests we're making significant progress in terms of delivering that. And I know that David will pick some of that up as well in terms of the transformation discussion. But in broad terms, I think we've identified that we've delivered over 90% of what we set out to deliver in terms of our overall planned savings requirements. That's not to say that there aren't some significant underlying pressures within that and some delayed implementation of some of the things we set out, but overall, in the context of the overall ask, that is quite a significant forecast. Now, obviously, things have moved on since Q3. We're actually in the throes of going through the final accounts process, so I can't give you a definitive outturn position. But all I can say is that things are still looking pretty positive in terms of what we will be reporting in terms of our outturn position. That will be reported in due course to Cabinet in June and full Council in July. There'll also be a public inspection period for the draft final accounts, which runs through, I think, for 6 weeks from the start of June, which will actually have information about our outturn position as well. So that will actually be in the public domain earlier than the Cabinet and Council report. So that's good on that. We obviously monitor more than just general fund revenue, of course. So the collection fund, which captures our costs and income relating to business rates and council tax, we're showing a bit of an in-year surplus there as well, about 2.5 million, which again is quite positive, and that suggests pretty strong performance in terms, not just in terms of income collection, which is stronger than we'd even budgeted, but also in terms of our overall council tax-based position, which is slightly higher overall than we'd anticipated. We've captured that as part of our budget plans going forward as well. I will say as we go through the financial monitoring that a number of issues that we reported at Q3, we'd actually captured it earlier than that in the monitoring process as early as Q1 and Q2. So that suggests that our financial monitoring is quite robust as well in terms of consistency through the year, and a number of high-ticket items that we'd identified through the monitoring we have captured and incorporated into our approved budget plans for 18-19 and 19-20, and collection fund is one of them. Housing revenue account, that's showing a relatively small surplus against an annual turnover of 93 million, and that's still on track in terms of our indicative outturn position. So again, that's good performance there in terms of our overall target spend on the housing revenue account, which captures income and expenditure relating to services provided to council tenants. It's basically the council's landlord account, which is a ring-fenced account. So just touching on, within the overall positive year-end position, there are some significant variations within that. Obviously, we've picked up through the year the overspend position on children's, and one of the key things we've done as part of the budget strategy, and it's spelled out in here as well, is significant review and reshaping of the budget strategy around children so that it actually marries up and ties up with the improvement plan and partnership agreement we've got with Leeds in terms of moving that agenda on. So there's been a significant realignment of children's budget with that improvement plan, which is the entirely logical and right thing to do. And we've put some investment into children's services to support that, but noting as well that they have savings targets to deliver in 1819 and 1920, particularly around agency and out-of-area replacement costs. So there are some targets there. So while there's upfront investment, that doesn't mean to say that they're not going to help support the council's bottom line while delivering improved outcomes for vulnerable children, on looked after children. Similarly on adults, we've put significant additional investment into 1819 budgets. The in-year position on adults is actually showing a bit of an underspend. That's largely attributable to a late government announcement of external funding for adult social care through the Better Care Fund, which was announced after we'd set our budget plans. So we've released that in year, and that's generated a bit of a surplus on the bottom line, but that's kind of a one-off in terms of this specific amount that was released. It was 8.3 million in 17-18. That reduces to just over 5 million in 18-19, and we reflected that in the budget plans as well. So I'm just making a point that while we've benefited from that amount in 17-18, it goes down a bit in 18-19, so we wouldn't necessarily have the same benefit going forward. But again, we've put significant additional resources into adults' budgets in 18-19 as well, particularly around the adult social care precept, which is targeted at adult social care, and that's largely paying for the additional costs for external provider costs around the national living wage uplift, acknowledging the significant cost pressures as a result of increases in the national living wage. There are elsewhere across general fund services, across the economy and infrastructure, corporate services and central budgets, there are a number of underspends as well. Some of them are one-off, some of them are sustainable, and they've been reflected in budget plans. As you'll have noticed, there's been some quite severe weather recently between Q3 and outturn. So there's been a significant increase in seasonal weather costs outside of services control, but we managed to absorb that in terms of our overall bottom line. But obviously we need to be mindful that going forward, that's something we would want to consider in terms of reserves requirement potentially, because we've had 3 relatively fallow years in terms of mild winters and then 1 extreme winter. It's not always easy to plan for that in terms of a base budget requirement, so having a contingency or set aside in reserves for those kind of extreme events is probably a good thing. Just want to focus briefly on capital as well. There's been significant slippage on the capital plan this year. So against a budget of 112 million, the Q3 forecast was 68 million, and probably as we get to outturn, it's going to be slightly lower than that. So, I mean, that's probably a lot of that is reflecting the fact that capital delivery can take time, and with the best will, sometimes there are delays, there's slippage, particularly around strategic priorities and some of the larger schemes, and that's highlighted in the report. I'll just highlight a typo as well in the report in terms of slippage on primary school. It says 43 million, it's actually 4 million. You'd have to go some to spend 43 million on a primary school. That'd be one heck of a footprint, I think. Have a class for every single pupil, couldn't you? So apologies for that. So we will pick that up again as part of the outturn report in terms of reviewing how we want to reprofile some of the capital that's going to slip into future years. I think probably the scope there to be a bit more challenging and smarter perhaps about profiling it over more than 1 year, so all that slippage just doesn't go into next year. Because we do recognise that sometimes the funding assumptions take a while to materialise, particularly where quite a significant part of the capital plan is funded through external grants. And sometimes it takes a while through the year before they're actually confirmed, before we can go ahead with schemes. So that will be reviewed as part of outturn. Reserves. That's always an interesting one, particularly in the current climate, as you'll appreciate. There's been a lot of national press and ongoing national press about, for example, what's happened at Northamptonshire County Council, and the whole question of financial resilience has come to the fore in terms of local government, and particularly councils with statutory responsibilities in demand-led services, i.e. like ourselves, with responsibilities for education, children and adults. So in that respect, there's quite a lot of councils nationally who are in a similar position in terms of overall demands and acknowledging that the funding landscape is challenging and remains challenging. So we did set our stall out as part of the annual revenue budget, particularly around some technical changes around how we set aside resources to support our debt requirement, that we would use some of the resources freed up from that, or use them and actually transfer them to reserves to build up our financial resilience. We have, if you look at it over a kind of a 7-8 year period, like a lot of councils, we did start to build up our reserves as the austerity measures started to kick in, anticipating that we'd probably need them in a planned way to actually draw down on them. And that, in the latter years, that's exactly what a lot of councils like ourselves have started to do now. So our pattern of reserves usage follows quite a national trend, particularly around councils with statutory responsibilities for social care, as I've just said. But what we want to do in terms of our own strategy, and this was spelled out in our annual budget, is we want to build up our financial resilience, particularly over the next 2 years, while recognising that we have drawn down reserves in a planned way to support our balanced budget requirements. That obviously reserves are a one-off resource, so we can't use them recurrently to fund base budget provision. That's not very sound financial management. But we do know that the national funding climate for local government is uncertain beyond 2020. We know that there's been national recognition of underlying funding pressures, particularly around adult social services. We know there's a green paper in the summer 2018, but we're not sure how that will go or when any recommendations from that will be implemented. And we know as well that there's business rates retention scheme, potential rollout there nationally from 2021, that we can retain 75%. We're actually, as you'll be aware, part of a pilot, Lead City Region pilot for 18-19, 100% retention. So that's given us a little bit of extra resource on the bottom line, and as you'll know, we've used some of that to support adult social care investment, social care investment, following a report that went to Cabinet recently. So given that the national funding landscape still remains uncertain for us, but it doesn't stop us planning for the longer term or planning ahead. We still have to do that. It's the right thing to do. I think building up the financial reserves position gives us a bit of buffer and resilience to be able to plan in a thoughtful way and use those reserves as contingency or actually as part of drawdown to support a balanced budget until we've got a clearer national position in terms of what our funding position is going to be beyond 2020. So that, in a sense, explains why our reserves position and our forecast is what it is, and that will be adding to it in the next couple of years, or intending to add to it. Just in terms of what we're doing around outturn, there was an early close down report that went to Cabinet recently, I think just early this week actually, as recent as that, 17th of April, which set out a couple of technical changes that we've done to release revenue resources to the bottom line to support some of the pressures that have come forward since Q3, and also to ensure that the ring-fenced reserves that we've got set aside to support our transformation programme that we had intended to draw down in 17-18, we can actually keep those and roll those forward, because we'll need those to support our continuing transformation agenda over the next couple of years. And by doing that, that means that we're not then eating into our other financial resilience reserves that we want to help support our longer term position. I'll shut up at that point because I haven't given colleagues an opportunity to raise any questions or points that they might want to ask.
Thanks, Eamon.
No worries.
you want to switch your mic off, please?
Yeah.
Can I just add to what Eamon's already said? This is obviously quite a detailed report, and as Eamon pointed out at the outset, we moved on a bit since quarter three. We did have an early closed down report. Given the financial position we found ourselves in the beginning of the year, I think the fact that we'll probably deliver most of the majority of the savings that we anticipate, I think it's only right to thank all the officers within the council that's worked really hard to achieve that budget. It was a challenging target when I first saw it. I thought 54 million in 1 year. That's a hell of a job to achieve, but everybody's worked really, really hard to achieve that. I think that's it's thanks to the officers doing that across the whole piece to deliver those services. Obviously, some areas are overstrength, but we always knew that we have pressures in certain areas. I think just to highlight the collection fund, I think that's again down to the hard work of officers and frontline staff, pushing the fact that we prefer people to pay by direct debit. I mean, when we started talking about direct debit, some people in this chamber thought the world was going to end because we were going to push everyone down direct. We're still doing that. But it works really well. It saves us a lot of money. It saves people a lot of hassle in busy lives. And I think that the route we took, despite the world didn't end, and I think it's been really successful. That's shown by the fantastic results from the collection fund. Eamon mentioned the problems around agency and out of area placements, and we had some figures only last week about the spending agency staff, and it is continuing to go down, and that's pleasing because if we can create an environment where people actually want to come and work for us as an employee and not come work as agency staff, means we're getting some things right, and that's a real positive, I think. And obviously the biggest spend was children's services, but we're actually now finding that people want to come and work for us, and that's a real benefit. Not only is it cheaper than agency, but it shows that they've got commitment and a support for the improvements we put into children's service, and that they believe we're heading in the right direction. So that's a real positive again. And again, it does save us some money. We'll never get rid of agency staff altogether because people do sometimes go on long-term sick, or we get short with people on holiday, but it is going in the right direction, and quite significantly so. So that's a real positive, I think. And Eamon touched on the out-of-area children. It does cost an awful lot of money to send children out of area. I have and they are very, very early conversation with the portfolio for children's services, and we are looking at ways how we might be able to address that, but they will obviously take a little while. I don't anticipate anything happening immediately, but we have got to look at this because it's a big spend, and I believe not only will it save us some money, I think our children should be better served by being in Kirklees. I accept that some children will always need to go out of area, but the amount we've got out of area, I think some of those we can get back in here. But it will require some investment. It will require a bit of longer-term thinking and strategy. But as I said, we have had this early conversation about how we might be able to do them. I think our children are best served by being looked after by this local authority. And as I said, we will work on that. And that's all I really want to add at the moment. And the question about reserves really is it's one of those, nobody's got an answer for it. How much do you have in reserve? How much should you have in reserve? No local authority will give you a definitive answer. The government will give you a definitive answer. It's a best guess, and it's vitally important that we do have some reserves, because if we didn't have had reserves, when would we stop the gritting? Because we've overspent on the gritting, because we had, as Eamon pointed out, the first bad winter for several years, and we can't predict the weather. And as a farmer once said to me, if we did, we'd not argue over it.
Graham, before I bring John in, you've answered the two questions I was going to ask, and it's always in the briefing, and that's the agency staff and the reserves. In terms of the agency staff, I think I've made a point in the past is rather than paying all that extra out, we need to reduce it by employing them. So I'll pass it to John, so you've answered that question.
I'd like to start by echoing some of what Graham just said about the performance from the officers. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of the delivery and the bit about the collection fund. I think that's been an ongoing thing for the last couple of years, hasn't it, where we've seen that percentage that we're collecting, getting higher and higher. And we must be getting to the level now where we can't get much more out of it. I'm not saying don't, but once you get to 100%, you really are there, aren't you? But I mean, I think we all in this chamber should recognise the work that's gone into delivering that, and should openly acknowledge that. So I think, pass that message back as well. That's from all of us, I think. I do have a number of questions. I'm not sure who the questions are to, but the first one is in relation to the capital plan, and I think you picked up, Eamon, some of the slippages there. And this is this is one thing that bugs me a little bit, because it's perennial. We always have this level of slippage, and we never seem to be able to get our plans right. And my question is around, there's two elements to the question. What are the learnings we're taking from this? And this is something you'll get from me continually in these meetings, is about, are we learning from what's happening? So are we embedding in the current capital plan a recognition that you made all the points quite validly, you know, when we're putting aside capital which needs to be matched with funding coming from elsewhere, it's not going to turn up on day one. Also, when you're putting together large strategic priorities and capital plans, they take time to come to fruition and can't all be delivered in one go. But that should be reflective in the plan. So what are we doing to pick that up and tweak that and take the learnings from that? And then the second one is, presumably, if we are ending up in terms of our outcome being probably around 2/3 or something of the actual plan, in terms of the revised plan, does that have a positive impact on our revenue? Because presumably we haven't had to borrow the amount of money we were intending on borrowing in terms of capital, and that has a cost. So is that being reflected back in the revenue? Then just coming on to reserves, and it's to Graham's point about what is the right level of reserves, and yeah, if we knew the answer to that, it'd be great. But I think the point there is, how robust is our risk analysis? Because in a sense, that's where we get to our best understanding and estimate, and are there some learnings we can take? You know, we don't tend to see much of the detail, and I've asked that question before in these meetings, about what our risks are, how we're managing those, and how those are reflecting through in terms of levels of reserves required. So I'd be interested in a view on that as well, please, if I may.
Amen. Yeah, I'll pick up on all those points, thank you. In terms of the capital plan slippage, in terms of where we're at, obviously we'll draw a line on the outturn position, but as I said, we've got an opportunity now to have a sort of rigorous internal officer challenge in terms of identifying how much of that slippage firstly we want to roll forward into future years, because as part of the outturn report that's presented, the financial outturn report that's presented to Cabinet and Council, it also not just looks at the outturn position for capital, but refreshes a 5-year capital plan. So there is a real opportunity there. I'm not saying necessarily we'll get it right immediately, but I think there'll be various points through the year where we can review it further as well, because I think there does need to be perhaps a little more rigour and internal officer challenge about some of the profiling across years, because I think perhaps there's a tendency to think about, well, we know we're going to roll it out at some point, so we'll park it, some of it at least, the following year, because at least we know we've got it. There may be something about if we slightly more bullish in terms of our profiling, that we'd be prepared to bring forward plans from future years if we know that actually the funding's secured earlier as well. So it could flex both ways, but I think that's something to definitely take back anyway, because there is a learning point there. There has been significant underspends across a number of years. Again, the only caveat is because I would say this, the scale of the Council's ambition around strategic priorities and the way that that's increased significantly in terms of additional investment, that could be quite subject to the vagaries of timing issues for a whole plethora of reasons. So we might not quite get that right in terms of things like town centre vibrancy, in terms of the rollout of that, because that's quite a significant programme in its own right, but I'll take your point on that. In terms of the impact on revenue budget, again, very valid point. It's probably something we need to present differently in terms of our outturn position around capital, because when we're setting our treasury management budget around things like borrowing assumptions, we're actually quite cautious as finance officers in building in some assumed slippage around borrowing. We're kind of preempting that based on practice, what actually happens, that not all the borrowing that's reflected in the funding position to support the capital plan will actually materialise. So when we set our treasury management budget, we actually factor in a degree of slippage on borrowing. It's around about 30%. What we don't currently show is reflect that in terms of the adjusted budget position to reflect a degree of slippage so that it properly matches our funding assumptions. So again, that's something we'll ensure we incorporate into the outturn position. But notwithstanding that, there will still be some underspend against the borrowing, and we've actually already taken that opportunity as part of our early close down review to convert some of what had been earmarked to support the capital plan through in-year revenue, convert that to borrowing as well, acknowledging that there's some slippage elsewhere in the plan. But I think there's still opportunities there to actually get things tighter around those issues. There is some wiggle room in borrowing, but we have taken some opportunity to utilise it. But obviously, I think we do need to close the gap a little bit in terms of the scale of the plan and deliverability. The issue again around reserves and how that ties into risk. I mean, we do include a high-level sort of corporate risk register as part of the annual budget report, and as part of the budget strategy update report as well. It is something actually that Martin Durnley and colleagues are looking at reviewing anyway in terms of our corporate approach to risk, and I think that's been very supported to Corporate Governance and Audit Committee recently as well, that we do need a different approach. Again, as part of our outturn report, we will be presenting something around risk, but it will be kind of refreshed because risks change, they're not static, and maybe some of the issues that were previously highlighted, we need to perhaps have a look at a different emphasis. It's always difficult to actually come up with an absolute quantification of some of these risks. It's in the past we've used things like probability and assigned an indicative amount to that in terms of what that risk could bring in terms of a bottom line pound note figure. But notwithstanding that, I think probably the key areas around risk that we are identifying, or some of the key areas that are underpinning our current reserve strategy, particularly around the national funding landscape for local government, as much as other financial shocks and emergencies and one-offs that hit us, be it seasonal weather or other things as well. So I think we do perhaps need to put a little more emphasis in terms of the corporate risk register and maybe some high-level quantifications of what that could be. I think that's an emerging agenda anyway in terms of our budget strategy refresh going forward. But I think we need to be more sophisticated in terms of looking at risk, in terms of sensitivity analysis and ranges of risk, because it's not an absolute figure, is it? You can be sort of relatively high, low, medium risk, and it's understanding those sorts of parameters within which our risk reserve strategy is operating. So again, another fair point.
John, do you want to come back?
Yeah, thanks for that, Eamon. Couple of things. I think you're right. I mean, I had discussions with Debbie before she escaped around capital plan slippage and how do we make sure that we adequately reflect that in the budget across the piece. And it's great to see that that's in the Treasury management. But I think, that the learning is, well, we need to make sure that flows through all of the elements of the financial budgets, rather than some of them are not in others, because that's where you get mismatches. And it means you're putting aside money that perhaps could be used for other purposes, because we earmarked it for something we don't actually believe we're going to do. And just coming back to the risks again, I mean, there does need to be that line of sight between knowing what our key corporate risks are, and therefore how much financial reserves we need to have available to cover those risks. Over and above, you need a level of reserves anyway for the things that you can't possibly anticipate. But to try and get closer to answering Graham's question of what is the right level of reserves, we'll never get there exactly, but we'll get closer to it. At least we've done that piece that says these are our key corporate risks. We understand, and we understand the cost associated with those, and we've provisioned, and we may not provision 100%, but we've made a conscious decision to provision for a portion of them. You can see that line of sight across then, and it just gives us as members more confidence that we've done that thinking and that we're closer to the position, and we're not literally finger in the air and we have no clue really how much we need or how much we've got in place. So I think it is a useful mechanism. As you say, it's an emerging agenda item. It's one I'll keep pushing through this panel. Thank you.
Yeah, just to respond to that, absolutely concur with that, and I think that is quite an apt and appropriate area to come back on as we do sort of develop it, to give some early discussion and thinking and sharing how that's emerging. One of the things we are looking to do, again, differently and slightly more sophisticated, is review our underpinning data and intelligence that supports some of our core assumptions, be it around demand-led or national funding. Which I said earlier, trying to develop a slightly more sophisticated approach, accepting that you're always going to be operating within parameters of risk, because we haven't, with the best will in the world, we haven't, any of us around here, got an absolute crystal ball on any of this. But as long as we understand those parameters, as you've just explained, then I think that will get us a long way, in at least in terms of a justification or understanding for a level of reserves we're holding and why we're holding them at any point in time. I'd definitely endorse that.
Thanks, Eamon. John is our resident expert who loves numbers. So I say that with respect. Before I get anybody else in, I just want to say one of the issues, and this is something I've discussed with Debbie before she left, is, I mean, John, you're an expert, or seem to love numbers on this, but we need some form of a training, not overlapping it with oversight scrutiny management, but financial training. And this is something that Debbie used to offer, or did, with cabinet members, to actually understand on, you know, the financial, not just the budget process, but where the money come in, where they're distributed. So I think as a corporate panel, we do need that at the beginning. So when you do kind of manage to get settled down and things start moving in the next month or two, to possibly come up with a training program that could be embedded with this, with the members.
I think that's a really good idea, and what I would suggest is I think the Chair of Scrutiny ought to have a discussion with the relevant officers about what wants to be included in that, because it is incredibly complicated. We drill right down to this. The local government finances is incredibly complicated, but I think the conversation should be between yourself and officers about what you want in that training programme, how deep you want to drill down in it, because you could get bogged down in minutiae very easily and then miss what you really want to get. So I think the conversation about what you want to know and a training package put in place, I think is a really good idea, because I say it's not straightforward in some of this stuff, I'm afraid. I just want to pick up on one thing. The capital plan, and we've had this every year while I've lived in Kirklees almost, I think it's a national disease. We're not very good at capital plans. I seem to think we've been discussing the third runway Heathrow for 10 years. China built an airport, an island, a railway in about 3 years. It's just we're not very good at it in this country. We talk about things all the time and it gets delayed because we need to talk to someone else. I don't know. I think it's just a national disease. And if we can do something around making this more better, if you like, more forward-thinking, that would be great. But I do fear that we do have this bit of a national disease. We're good at talking about things and it takes us so long to get there. But it would be nice if we could have some sort of real strategy around it, but it is very difficult in this country. We're good talkers, not doers, I think, sometimes.
Thank you, Graham. I totally agree. When it comes to the financial monitoring, and this is something I've had from the briefing, is you literally go through some of the colour coding of, you know, whether it's green, red, and all the rest of it, but there is no kind of going back how we improved. Is there any issues that we can raise? So it's almost like, I think this first particular year has been kind of an area that we kind of jig things around and move of how we want to develop things going forward. Philip.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just getting my bearings on the policy in public health. In terms of the 54 million, I think it's something that David will touch on as well in terms of the informal session around transformation. But what I said earlier about the 90%, just over 90%, I'd say the vast majority of that is recurrent savings. And you're right, there are some one-offs in other areas that are mitigated against that, as I mentioned earlier about the additional external government funding that dropped in the 8.3 million. We hadn't anticipated all of that, so that is undoubtedly offset, and that's going to reduce next year, so that is non-recurrent. There are some elements within the transformation programme that have, in terms of time of delivery, not just of the savings, but quite a lot of it's around service redesign as well and reshaping, where there's been some slippage in reshaping as well. So the intention is that those will have delivered. It'll just take a little bit longer. So as we go through 2018-19, it's not just about having a look at the planned savings for 2018-19 that were approved at Budget Council in February. It's also about reviewing some of the items that roll forward from 17-18 that hadn't been delivered as well, that obviously need to be in view. So it's kind of a bit of a mix, but it's mostly recurrent, I would say. On the specific issue that you raised in the appendix, I think it's basically a budget profiling issue, why it looks different, and it's to do with the release of the public health grant funding in the year. So what you probably highlighted there is one of the things we set ourselves to do better from an officer perspective and budget manager perspective is have better profiling of budgets in the year so that it provides better quality financial information. If you get your profiling wrong, it can distort the quality of the financial information and you can make some poor decisions on the back of it. I think what you've highlighted is we probably just haven't quite got the profiling right, potentially on the public health grant, but overall by year end it will come in online, so that's something we can look at. It is quite a significant grant, it's well over 20 million, so that explains that. Okay.
Any further questions? Julie?
It's not a question, just a comment, but any training that the panel members feel that they need, I'll happily arrange that, so that's that one. Just have to ask and we'll organise whatever is needed to help support panel members in the work. On the looking forward to next year, Amy did mention a couple of times today funding assumptions, and we discussed budget assumptions at corporate governance and audit, and I think it might be useful in your forward work programme to put funding assumptions on there, because it would be good to review those assumptions. They frame the budgets. Okay.
Yeah, I think what Graham mentioned about the training in terms of what we want, rather than dictated by the officers. I think something I discussed with Debbie before she left was, when it comes to the financial, it's a minefield. Some people understand it a bit more in depth, others don't. And it's that particular targeted area that we as a panel can work with them and then just come up with a plan where we understand when you're looking at the financial monitoring, it's not just kind of the greens and the reds and ticks and the boxes. It's actually understanding, and some of the questions that you've asked of how do we monitor, what's the outcome, we can go back and actually look at that in a broader sense. So we get a bit more sense of that we are doing, we are scrutinising rather than just kind of going through the formalities of it. Hilary.
On that theme, corporate governance and audit is deliberately running a series of training sessions as part of their meetings, and every councillor is invited to those, because we've had treasury management and all sorts, and it might be that only part of it has a relevance, but it helps people understand the minefield that's finance. Please do come along.
Thank you, Eamon. Graham, for coming on. I just want to close this agenda item off. Item 7, looking forward to 2018-19. Now, we have got, I think, few items to put forward, and bear in mind there's a lot more that can be incorporated in the coming, certainly in the first planning meeting. So can we just go through, is there any particulars that we want to highlight for the next municipal year to be brought in? We've got the commissioning. Julie?
Something that I'm very keen for the panel to look at, if you're happy to do so, is commercialisation. It's a growing thing across local authorities, and I think there's a lot of authorities around the country we could learn from, because some are more ahead than we are. So I think it would be a useful exercise and help support our officers in driving it forward locally.
I think I've discussed this in the past in relation, in the last couple of months, of bringing certain items, and it overlaps with other members. So it might be whoever takes over to kind of sit down and go through and do a crossover and work out where something that we can take over rather than... But my recommendation is we have what we have in front. We've got a couple of items. Other than that, we leave it for the planning meeting for the first municipal year that we set up, and take it from there. Members? Hilary.
Just a couple of things. The library review is going to be something that's coming up in the next month or two. And can I put in procurement? Seeing as it seems to be coming towards a head.
My understanding was that was going to be in the next item. What? Yeah, procurement was, because of the number of issues we highlighted. Any others? In that case, can we leave this, and it's an ongoing progress for the next first corporate meeting, and then add a few other additionals? I formally close this meeting. Thank you very much.